I spent 35 years standing in my husband Robert's shadow. 35 years of smiling at business dinners, hosting charity events, and playing the perfect corporate wife while secretly being the backbone of everything he built. I managed our home, raised our son, and most importantly, though no one knew it then, I quietly made the investment decisions that transformed Robert's modest inheritance into the fortune our family enjoyed. The day Robert died was the day I thought I could finally step into the light. I was wrong. The funeral was exactly as Robert would have wanted it: elegant, dignified, with all the right people in attendance. Business associates in perfectly tailored suits, old college friends who'd become successful in their own right, even a few politicians we'd supported over the years. Everyone spoke highly of him. My husband, the financial genius, the savvy businessman who could spot an opportunity miles away. If only they knew. My son Andrew stood beside me during the service, tall and handsome in his black suit, the spitting image of his father in his prime. He held my arm, supporting me as I dabbed at tears that refused to fall. Everyone assumed I was too grief-stricken to cry. The truth was more complicated. Mrs. Maxwell, Robert was a titan in the industry. His investment strategies were unparalleled, said Jonathan Williams, Robert's oldest friend and business partner, as he clasped my hand at the reception afterward. I don't know how any of us will navigate these markets without his intuition. I smiled thinly. Robert certainly had a special way of seeing things. What I didn't say was that for the past 20 years, every major investment decision, every company acquisition, every strategic market move had come from me. Robert had been the face, the voice, the handshake, but I had been the brain. It had started innocently enough. Robert came home frustrated one evening, unsure about a potential investment. I'd studied economics in college before dropping out to marry him, and I'd kept up with financial news as a hobby. I offered a few insights, and to my surprise, he listened. The investment paid off handsomely. After that, he began seeking my advice more frequently, though he never acknowledged it publicly. Over time, it became our unspoken arrangement. I analyzed the opportunities, he executed them, and everyone praised his brilliant mind. I never minded staying in the background. I loved Robert in my own way, and our arrangement worked for us. He provided a life of luxury and stability, and I found intellectual fulfillment in our secret partnership. I was content knowing the truth, even if no one else did, or so I thought. 3 days after the funeral, Andrew asked me to meet him at Robert's home office to discuss urgent family business. I arrived to find him sitting behind his father's desk, looking every inch the heir apparent in one of Robert's old suits. He'd even styled his hair the same way. The resemblance was unsettling. "Mom," he said, not bothering to stand when I entered. "We need to talk about the company and the estate." I took a seat across from him, feeling suddenly like a visitor in my own home. "Of course, Andrew. I know this is a difficult time, but there's no rush. The company has a solid management team, and—" "Actually, there is a rush," he interrupted, pulling a folder from the desk drawer. Dad left some specific instructions about the transition of power. He wanted me to step in immediately as CEO and take control of the family's assets. I blinked, caught off guard. That's strange. Robert and I had discussed this, and we agreed that there would be a gradual transition. You're only 32, Andrew. You've only been with the company for 5 years. Andrew's jaw tightened. Dad obviously felt I was ready. He prepared these documents with his private attorney. He slid the folder across the desk. I opened it and scanned the contents, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. The papers outlined a succession plan that would indeed hand control of Maxwell Investments to Andrew immediately. It was dated just 3 months ago, during a period when Robert and I had been arguing about Andrew's readiness to take on more responsibility. I had insisted he needed more experience. Robert had defended our son's capabilities. "I see," I said, carefully, closing the folder. Well, there are still other matters to consider. The family trust, our personal investments. It's all addressed in there. Andrew cut in again. Dad restructured everything. The company, the investments, the properties, they all transfer to me as the new head of the family. You'll receive a generous monthly allowance, of course. An allowance. Like I was a child who needed an adult to manage my pocket money. Andrew, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. That doesn't sound like the arrangement your father and I discussed. We built this fortune together. Half of everything has always been mine. He had the audacity to laugh, a short, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. Mom, let's be honest. Dad built this empire. You were a wonderful wife and mother, and he always made sure you were well taken care of. That's not changing, but the business decisions, the financial matters, those were his domain, and now they're mine. I felt as though I'd been slapped. Decades of work, of careful analysis and strategic planning, erased with a few condescending words. I wanted to shout the truth at him, that without me, there would be no empire for him to inherit. That his father, for all his charisma and business connections, had relied on my financial acumen to build our wealth. That the allowance he so generously mentioned would be paid from profits I had generated. But old habits die hard, and I had spent too many years keeping my role a secret. I think we should consult with the family attorney, I said instead. These changes seem very sudden, and I want to make sure they reflect your father's true wishes. Andrew's expression hardened. I've already spoken with Mr. Richardson. He confirmed everything is legally binding. He stood up, indicating our meeting was over. Look, Mom, I know this is a lot to process right after Dad's death. Why don't you take some time? Maybe go stay at the lake house for a few weeks? Clear your head, grieve properly. I can handle things here. Handle things. Like I was a problem to be managed, not a partner to be respected. I left his office in a daze, retreating, to my bedroom where I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. The palatial master suite that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a gilded cage. Family photos lined the dresser. Robert and me on our wedding day, Andrew's graduation, family vacations on the yacht. Carefully curated moments that told such a small part of our story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about a conversation Robert and I had just a few weeks before his heart attack. We'd been sitting on the terrace, watching the sunset over the city skyline. You know, Diana, he'd said, swirling his whiskey, we should tell Andrew the truth someday, about your role in all this. I'd been surprised. It was the first time in decades he'd acknowledged our arrangement so directly. Why now? I asked. Because he needs to understand what it really takes to run this business. He thinks it's all about swagger and handshakes, about being the smartest guy in the room. He doesn't see the analysis, the patience, the foresight. He'd reached for my hand then. He doesn't see what you bring to the table. I squeezed his hand. He looks up to you so much. I don't want to change that. Robert had shaken his head. Maybe that's the problem. He looks up to a version of me that doesn't really exist. The real me is smart enough to listen to you. We'd agreed to have a family meeting after he returned from his business trip to London. But he never made it back alive. The next morning, I found Andrew in the kitchen with his wife, Melissa. They fell silent when I entered, exchanging a glance that made it clear they'd been discussing me. Good morning, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Mom, Andrew began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I was starting to hate. Melissa, and I have been talking, and we think it might be good for you to consider downsizing. This house has so many memories of Dad, and it's really too big for just one person. I nearly dropped my cup. Downsizing? Andrew, I've lived here for 20 years. This is my home. Of course it is, Melissa chimed in with artificial sweetness. She was a former model who'd married Andrew right after he joined his father's company. Beautiful, calculating, and always dressed impeccably, even at 8 in the morning. But maintaining a property like this is a lot of work. And since the house is technically a company asset now, my coffee suddenly tasted bitter. What do you mean, a company asset? Andrew cleared his throat. Dad transferred the deed to Maxwell Investments last year for tax purposes. Didn't he tell you? The look in his eyes told me he knew very well that Robert had done no such thing. As CEO, I need to make decisions based on what's best for the company's bottom line. And having a single person occupy a 15,000 square foot mansion isn't exactly efficient. I see, I said quietly, setting down my cup. And where exactly do you propose I go? Melissa brightened. We've found the most darling condo in Westlake Gardens. It's a seniors community, very exclusive, with a lovely view of the park. A seniors community. I was 58 years old. That's very thoughtful, I said, my voice tightly controlled. But I think I'll make my own living arrangements when, and if I decide to move. Andrew frowned. Mom, I don't think you understand. The company needs to liquidate some assets, and this property is at the top of the list. We've already had offers. You're selling my home without even consulting me? The room seemed to tilt slightly. Dad's home, Andrew corrected. And yes, as CEO, these decisions fall to me now. We can have the company cover your rent at Westlake for the first year to ease the transition. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Robert's suits and sitting in Robert's chair, and felt something inside me crack. The dutiful wife and mother who had stayed silent for decades disappeared, replaced by a woman I barely recognized. I need some air, I said abruptly, abandoning my coffee and heading for the door. Mom, we need to resolve this, Andrew called after me. The new owners want to take possession at the end of the month. The end of the month, 2 weeks away. They'd planned all this while I was still arranging my husband's funeral. I spent the day driving aimlessly around the city, past the skyscrapers, bearing the Maxwell name, past the charitable foundations we'd established, past the university where a business building carried Robert's name but contained an economics library I had quietly funded. Everywhere I looked, I saw the fruits of my labor attributed to someone else. By evening, I had reached a decision. I returned home, yes, my home, and went straight to Robert's study. I knew he kept a small personal safe behind the painting of his father, accessible only to him and me. Inside was a worn leather journal I had given him on our 5th anniversary, encouraging him to record his thoughts on our growing business. Instead, Robert had used it to document our arrangement. Every major decision, every successful investment, with notes about my analysis and recommendations. At the time, I'd been touched that he'd created this record, even if it was for his eyes only. Now it might be my only proof. There were also USB drives containing years of our email correspondence, where we discussed investment strategies in detail. I had always used a private email account, separate from the company servers, for these exchanges. Robert had insisted on it. To protect our special arrangement, he'd said with a wink. I gathered everything and drove to the one place I knew would be safe, my sister Catherine's house across town. Catherine had never approved of my marriage to Robert, or of the way I'd allowed him to take credit for my work. You're shrinking yourself to make him look bigger, she'd told me once, but she had respected my choices and kept my secrets. When I showed up at her door with a box of evidence and tears streaming down my face, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just pulled me into a fierce hug and whispered, "Whatever you need, I'm here." That night, I told her everything, not just about my role in building the Maxwell fortune, but about Andrew's betrayal. How he planned to evict me from my own home and relegate me to a seniors community with a monthly allowance, as if the past 35 years of my life counted for nothing. That ungrateful little shit, Catherine said, pouring us both a generous glass of wine. My proper schoolteacher sister rarely swore, which made it all the more satisfying when she did. What are you going to do? I took a sip of wine, feeling more resolved by the minute. I'm going to take back what's mine. How? From what you've said, Robert left everything to Andrew, legally speaking. Not everything, I said, thinking of the offshore accounts I had established years ago, investments made in my name alone, a safety net I'd created without telling Robert. They weren't nearly as substantial as the main Maxwell fortune, but they would give me the resources to fight. And Robert may have signed those documents, but I can prove they don't reflect our true arrangement. The question is whether I want to do this publicly. Going public would mean exposing not just Andrew's betrayal, but also my own decades-long complicity in the fiction of Robert Maxwell, financial genius. It would mean admitting to the world that I had allowed my husband to take credit for my work, that I had helped perpetuate the very stereotype I now found myself victim to, the supportive wife with no head for business. Maybe there's another way, Catherine suggested. Maybe you can make Andrew see reason without having to air all this in court. I laughed hollowly. You didn't see his face, Kath. He's not interested in reason. He and Melissa have already decided. I'm an inconvenient old woman who needs to be tucked away somewhere. Then make him fear you, she said simply. Show him just enough of your hand that he realizes you could destroy everything. His inheritance, his reputation, the legacy he's so eager to claim. I considered this. Andrew had grown up believing in his father's business prowess. Finding out that the true financial wizard had been his mother all along would shatter not just his inheritance plans, but his entire worldview. Would the threat of that revelation be enough to bring him to the negotiating table? The next morning, I called our family attorney, Michael Richardson. Not the corporate lawyer who had apparently rubber-stamped Andrew's takeover, but the man who had handled our personal affairs for decades and whom I trusted implicitly. Diana, he said warmly when I was shown into his office. I've been meaning to call you. These past few weeks must have been incredibly difficult. They've been eye-opening, I replied. Michael, I need your honest assessment of something. Did Robert discuss his succession plans with you before he died? Michael looked uncomfortable. He mentioned some changes, yes. But Diana, you know I can't discuss the specifics of those conversations due to attorney-client privilege. Even though I'm his widow? Unfortunately, yes. But he hesitated. I can tell you that I advised him against making such significant changes without further consideration. He seemed pressured. By Andrew, I said. It wasn't a question. Michael didn't confirm or deny it, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. I have evidence, I said, lowering my voice, that the Maxwell fortune was built largely on my financial strategies, not Robert's. Evidence that could significantly impact how a court might view the distribution of assets. Michael's eyebrows shot up. Diana, that would be quite the revelation. Yes, it would, and not one I make lightly. But Andrew is trying to force me out of my home, Michael. He's treating me like an afterthought, not like the woman who helped build the very fortune he's so eager to control. The attorney leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. In all our years of acquaintance, he had only ever seen the supportive wife, the elegant hostess, never the strategist. What exactly are you asking me to do? I want to know my options. If I challenged the will and the recent changes to the company structure, what would that process look like? And more immediately, can Andrew really sell the house out from under me? For the next hour, Michael walked me through various scenarios. The house situation was complicated. If Robert had indeed transferred ownership to the company, Andrew, as CEO, could technically sell it. But there were potential avenues to challenge that transfer, especially if I could prove it was done without my knowledge or consent. As for the larger fortune, challenging the will would be messy and public. But Michael agreed that my evidence, if as substantial as I claimed, could form the basis for a significant legal case. The courts generally try to honor a deceased person's wishes, he cautioned. But if you can prove that Robert's true wishes were different from what's reflected in the most recent documents, and especially if you can demonstrate that you were the true architect of the family's wealth, well, that changes things considerably. I left his office with a clearer sense of my legal position, but still uncertain about my next move. Did I want to drag our family's private affairs into the public eye? Did I want to tarnish Robert's memory? He had been complicit in keeping my role secret, yes, but he had also valued my input in a way that many men of his generation would not have. Our arrangement had been mutual, even if its consequences now felt anything but fair. When I returned to the house, still my house, I reminded myself fiercely. I found Andrew waiting for me in the foyer. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "We have realtors coming to take photos of the property this afternoon." "Cancel them," I said calmly, hanging up my coat. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Cancel the appointment. I'm not moving, and this house is not being sold." Andrew's face flushed with anger. "Mom, we've been over this. The decision isn't yours to make anymore." "Actually," I said, meeting his gaze steadily, "I've just come from Michael Richardson's office. There are serious questions about the validity of those documents you showed me, especially regarding the house." "Richardson? He's not the company attorney. He has no say in this matter." "No, but he is an officer of the court who has known our family for 20 years, and he finds it very interesting that your father would make such dramatic changes to his succession plans without proper consultation." Andrew's expression wavered between anger and uncertainty. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. And here's another fact you should consider. I have documented evidence that the investment strategies that built the Maxwell fortune, the ones you and everyone else attribute to your father, were actually mine." The color drained from Andrew's face. "That's ridiculous. Is it? Ask yourself why your father never explained his investment methodology to you. Why, despite all your grooming to take over the business, he never taught you how to analyze opportunities the way he did. It's because he couldn't. That was my domain." Andrew shook his head in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that my father, one of the most respected investors in the country, was what? Taking secret instructions from his housewife?" The contempt in his voice when he said housewife made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. "Not instructions, partnership. Your father was brilliant with people, with relationships, with seeing the big picture. I was better with numbers, with spotting patterns, with predicting market movements. Together, we built something remarkable." My son stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. In a way, I was. The mother he knew, the supportive background, figure who handled social calendars and charity galas, was revealing herself to be someone else entirely. "I don't believe you," he said finally. "And even if what you're saying had any truth to it, it doesn't change the legal reality. Dad left the company to me. End of story." I had hoped, naively perhaps, that the truth would be enough. That my son would recognize the injustice and work with me toward a fair resolution. But looking at the stubborn set of his jaw, so like his father's when Robert dug in his heels, I realized this would not be resolved with a single conversation. "The realtors aren't coming in today or any other day," I said firmly. "I'm prepared to go public with everything, Andrew. Your father's reliance on my financial strategies, the true story behind the Maxwell fortune. How do you think the board will react when they learn that the new CEO's only qualification is being the son of the figurehead, not the actual financial mind behind the company's success?" It was a bluff, at least partly. I wasn't sure I was ready to expose everything. But Andrew didn't know that. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "You'd destroy Dad's legacy." "Your father's legacy is secure," I countered. "He was a brilliant businessman, in many ways. But yours? That remains to be seen. Think carefully about your next move, Andrew. Because I won't be pushed aside so easily. I walked past him toward the stairs, feeling his glare on my back. I had fired the first shot in what promised to be a difficult battle. My son had inherited his father's stubbornness, but he had underestimated me, just as the rest of the world had always done. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the front door slam. Through the window, I watched Andrew storm to his car, phone already pressed to his ear. No doubt calling the company lawyers preparing for war. Let them come, I thought, a strange calm settling over me. I've been invisible for too long. It's time the world saw what I'm capable of. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Male voices, unfamiliar and authoritative. I dressed quickly and made my way to the foyer where I found 2 security guards in dark suits standing beside Andrew. "What's going on?" I asked, clutching the railing of the grand staircase. Andrew straightened his tie. One of Robert's favorites, I noticed with a pang. "Mom, I've tried to be reasonable, but you've forced my hand. These gentlemen are from Maxwell Investments' security team. They'll be stationed here while the transition of the property takes place." "Security team?" I repeated incredulously. "Are you having me watched in my own home?" "They're here to ensure company assets are protected," Andrew replied coolly. "Standard. Procedure." "There's nothing standard about this situation," I retorted, descending the stairs. The security guards avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Andrew checked his watch. "I have a board meeting. We'll discuss this further this evening. In the meantime, the guards will help you identify personal items you wish to take with you. Everything else stays with the property." "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "And if these men attempt to remove me from this house, I'll have them arrested for assault." The guards exchanged nervous glances. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Mom, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The company owns this house. You have no legal right to be here without permission." "We'll see about that," I replied, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling Michael Richardson right now. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to hear about your tactics." Andrew hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed in frustration. "Fine. Take a few more days to come to terms with reality. But the house is being shown to buyers on Friday, with or without your cooperation." He turned to the guards. "Stay outside. Make sure no one removes anything valuable from the premises." After Andrew left, I sank onto the bottom step, my heart pounding. He was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. I had days, not weeks, to formulate my defense. I called Catherine immediately. "I need a place to stay," I said without preamble, "and I need to move some things out of the house before Andrew locks me out completely." "Come stay with me," she offered instantly. "And I'll rent a storage unit for anything you need to keep safe." "Thank you," I breathed, relief washing over me. "But there's something else I need first. Something in Robert's office downtown. During our marriage, Robert and I had maintained a private code for sensitive documents. Anything marked with a small blue dot in the corner was actually my work, analysis I had prepared, strategies I had developed. It had started as a practical system. If Robert needed to reference something during a meeting, the dot told him it was my analysis he was presenting. Over time, it had become almost a private joke between us, the secret signal of my invisible hand in the Maxwell empire. I needed those files now. They would be crucial evidence if this conflict went to court. "I've never asked you for a favor like this before," I told Catherine. "But I need to get into Robert's office at Maxwell Tower. Today, while Andrew is in his board meeting." Catherine didn't hesitate. "Tell me what to do." 2 hours later, we walked into the gleaming lobby of Maxwell Investments headquarters. I was dressed conservatively in a dark pantsuit, my hair pulled back, sunglasses obscuring part of my face. Catherine carried a florist's box with a tasteful arrangement. "Mrs. Maxwell." The receptionist looked startled to see me. "We weren't expecting you today." "I know, Jennifer. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision," I said, summoning the gracious smile I'd perfected over decades of playing the corporate wife. I wanted to collect a few personal items from Robert's office. Mementos, photographs. You know how it is. Jennifer's expression softened. Of course. Mr. Andrew is in the boardroom until noon. Would you like me to let him know you're here? No. Need to disturb the meeting. I won't be long. I gestured to Catherine. This is my sister. She's helping me today. And I brought these for Robert's office, Catherine added, indicating the flowers. Diana mentioned his assistant might appreciate them. How thoughtful, Jennifer smiled. Let me get you a visitor's badge, and I'll call up to let them know you're coming. Moments later, we were in the executive elevator heading to the top floor. Catherine squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded, though my heart was racing. I had visited this building hundreds of times over the years, always as the founder's wife, never as a woman with business of her own. The disparity had never bothered me before. Now it felt like a wound. Robert's executive assistant, Margaret, greeted us warmly. She had worked with Robert for 15 years and had always treated me with genuine respect. Diana, it's so good to see you. We've all been thinking about you. Thank you, Margaret. I hope I'm not disrupting your day. I just wanted to collect some personal items from Robert's office. Of course, she hesitated. Mr. Andrew has been reorganizing things, but most of your husband's personal effects are still there. The slight emphasis on most told me that Andrew had already begun erasing his father's presence from the executive suite, staking his claim. I won't be long, I promised. And my sister brought these for you. Catherine handed over the flower arrangement, which Margaret accepted with a pleased smile. How lovely. I'll just put these in water. Take your time. As soon as Margaret disappeared around the corner, I moved quickly to Robert's private office, Catherine trailing behind. The office looked different already. The family photos that had once lined the credenza were gone, replaced by sleek modern art pieces that screamed Andrew. Robert's vintage desk accessories had been swapped for minimalist chrome ones. But the massive walnut desk remained, and, more importantly, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that concealed a wall of filing cabinets. Watch the door, I whispered to Catherine as I pressed the hidden latch that revealed the cabinet system. Robert had insisted on keeping paper copies of our most important analyses, despite the digital age. Old-school security, he'd called it. I knew exactly what I was looking for. The blue-dotted files containing my market analyses for the 5 biggest acquisitions Maxwell Investments had made over the past decade. Each one had resulted in billions in profit, and each one had been entirely my strategy. I located them quickly. Robert had always been meticulously organized, and slipped them into my oversized handbag. Then, on impulse, I also took the handwritten notes I'd made for Robert before major presentations. Notes in my distinctive handwriting, with his scribbled responses in the margins. Proof of our partnership. Just as I was closing the cabinet, Catherine hissed, "Someone's coming." I quickly pressed the latch, returning the bookshelf to its ordinary appearance, and moved to Robert's desk. I picked up a silver frame, one of the few personal items Andrew had left untouched, which held a photo of the 3 of us from years ago. The door opened, and Margaret entered with a sympathetic smile. "Found what you were looking for?" I held up the frame. "Just some memories. Thank you for giving me this time, Margaret." "Of course." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Diana, there's something you should know. Mr. Andrew has called a full staff meeting for tomorrow morning. The rumor is he's announcing major changes to the company structure." My stomach tightened. What kind of changes? No one knows for sure, but... She glanced toward the door to ensure we were still alone. "He's been meeting with representatives from Harrington Global. There's talk of a merger or maybe even a sale. Harrington Global, the company's main competitor, run by Victor Harrington, a man Robert had despised for his cutthroat tactics and questionable ethics. A sale? I echoed, stunned. That's impossible. Robert would never allow it. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Robert isn't here anymore. The weight of those simple words hit me like a physical blow. Robert isn't here anymore. And in his absence, his son, our son, was prepared to dismantle everything we had built together. "Thank you for telling me, Margaret," I said quietly. "You've always been loyal to this company, and to Robert." She straightened, a flash of the efficient professional replacing the momentary vulnerability. "I should get back to my desk. Mr. Andrews' meeting should be ending soon." We said our goodbyes, and Catherine and I made our way back to the elevator. We had nearly reached it when a familiar voice rang out behind us. Mother! What a surprise! Turned to find Andrew striding toward us, flanked by two men in expensive suits whom I recognized as Harrington Global executives. "Andrew," I acknowledged coolly. "I came to collect some personal items." His eyes narrowed, flickering to my handbag. "What kind of personal items?" "Photographs. Mementos. Nothing that would interest you, clearly." I gestured to the office behind him, where his renovations were already well underway. Andrew's face flushed slightly, but he maintained his composure in front of his guests. "Gentlemen, this is my mother, Diana Maxwell. Mother, I'm sure you remember Victor Harrington and James Bennett from Harrington Global." "Of course," I said, extending my hand with the polite smile I had perfected over years of business functions. "It's been some time. The last occasion was the charity gala for children's literacy, I believe." Victor Harrington, a silver-haired man with calculating eyes, took my hand. "Mrs. Maxwell, my condolences on your loss. Robert was a formidable competitor." "Thank ye. You." "He always spoke very distinctly about you as well," I replied, allowing just enough coolness in my tone to make my meaning clear. Robert had, in fact, referred to Victor as that snake oil salesman in an Armani suit on numerous occasions. Andrew cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We were just wrapping up a preliminary discussion about potential synergies between our companies." "How fascinating," I said. Robert always believed Maxwell Investments was strongest as an independent entity. He turned down acquisition offers from Harrington Global 3 times, as I recall. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "You seem very well informed about your husband's business dealings, Mrs. Maxwell." "Robert and I discussed everything," I replied, smoothly. "We were partners in all things." Andrew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mother was always very supportive of Father's work, but business conditions change, and we must adapt." "Indeed," I agreed, "though integrity and vision remain constant. Don't you think, Mr. Harrington?" Before Victor could respond, the elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, Catherine beside me. "Enjoy your meeting, gentlemen. Andrew, we'll continue our conversation about the house this evening." As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Andrew's face, flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Good. Let him squirm. That was masterful," Catherine murmured as we descended. "You put them all on notice without directly confronting anyone." "A skill honed over decades of corporate wives' luncheons," I replied dryly. "The art of the polite threat." Back at Catherine's house, I spread the files across her dining room table and explained their significance. These 5 acquisitions transformed Maxwell Investments from a mid-sized financial firm to a market leader, I said, pointing to the detailed analyses, each marked with my blue dot. The Westridge merger in 2015, the Carlton Media buyout in 2018, the restructuring of the Glowtech portfolio just last year, all my strategy, all executed under Robert's name. Catherine examined the pages of complex financial projections, margin notes, and strategic recommendations. "Diana, this is incredible. You predicted market movements with astounding accuracy. I've always had a knack for patterns, I said simply. But more importantly, I have proof here that I was the architect of Maxwell's most profitable moves. My handwriting, my analysis, my recommendations, all implemented exactly as I suggested. So, what now? Catherine asked. Do you take this to a lawyer? I hesitated. Despite everything Andrew had done, the thought of publicly exposing the truth about the Maxwell fortune still troubled me. Not for Robert's sake, he had agreed we should tell Andrew the truth, but for my son's. The revelation would devastate not just his inheritance claims, but his entire understanding of his father. I need to try one more approach first, I decided. I need to show Andrew this evidence privately and offer him a compromise. If he's reasonable, we can avoid a public battle that would harm everyone, including the company. And if he's not reasonable? Catherine pressed. I gathered the files deliberately, squaring the edges with practiced precision. Then I'll do what I should have done years ago. I'll step out of the shadows and claim what's mine. That evening, I returned to the mansion to find Andrew waiting in the living room, nursing a glass of his father's favorite scotch. I didn't appreciate your performance at the office today, he said without preamble. It wasn't a performance, I replied, setting my bag down. It was the truth. Your father would never have sold to Harrington Global. You don't know what Dad would have done in today's market conditions. I know exactly what he would have done, I countered, because I was the one who analyzed those conditions for him for 35 years. Andrew scoffed. Are you still pushing that fantasy? Mother, I understand this is a difficult time, but inventing some secret role for yourself in Dad's business won't change the reality of the situation. I'm not inventing anything. I reached into my bag and withdrew one of the files, placing it on the coffee table between us. Do you recognize that blue dot? Andrew frowned, picking up the file. Dad's system for priority documents. What about it? It wasn't for priorities. It was a code between us. Blue dot meant the analysis came from me, not your father. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening as he recognized the acquisition strategy for Carlton Media, one of the company's most successful moves. This is just Dad's work with your notes on it, he said dismissively. Look at the handwriting. Andrew, the main analysis, the projections, the strategic recommendations, all in my handwriting. Your father's notes are in the margins, responding to my suggestions. He slammed the file shut. This proves nothing. So you helped him organize his thoughts. That doesn't make you the mastermind behind Maxwell Investments. I pulled out the remaining files, spreading them across the table. 5 major acquisitions, 5 market-transforming decisions, all originated from my analysis. The blue dot was your father's acknowledgement of my role. Andrew's face flushed with anger, but I could see the first flickers of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew his father's meticulous nature, his systematic approach to documentation. The blue dot system was exactly the kind of precise private code Robert would have created. Even if this were true, and I'm not saying it is, it changes nothing legally, he said finally. Dad left the company to me. Your assistance was given within the context of your marriage, community property. Perhaps, I conceded. But I wonder how the board would react to learning that the actual financial genius behind Maxwell's success wasn't Robert Maxwell, but his quiet, overlooked wife. How would the markets respond? How would the Harrington deal fare when investors learn that the strategic mind behind the company's growth won't be part of the merged entity? Andrew's knuckles whitened around his glass. You wouldn't destroy Dad's legacy out of spite. It's my legacy too, I said softly. And I'm not interested in destruction, Andrew. I'm interested in truth and fairness. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the sun I remembered. The thoughtful boy who had once possessed a strong sense of justice. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. What do you want? He asked bluntly. A fair division of what Robert and I built together. The house remains mine. I retain a 40% ownership stake in Maxwell Investments with a seat on the board, and any major strategic decisions, including potential sales or mergers, require my approval. Andrew laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. You expect me to hand over nearly half the company based on some old files and your word? Not just these files, I replied calmly. I have years of email correspondence between your father and me, discussing every major decision the company made. I have the journal where Robert documented our arrangement in his own handwriting. And I have at least 3 former executives who were aware of my role and would testify to it. This last part was a slight exaggeration. I had one former executive, Robert's old friend Thomas Jenkins, who had accidentally discovered our arrangement years ago and had kept the secret out of loyalty to Robert. Whether he would testify was another matter entirely. Andrew set his glass down carefully, his expression calculating. You're bluffing. Try me, I challenged. But consider this. I'm offering you a chance to handle this privately, to maintain the company's stability and your father's public legacy. If we go to court, everything becomes public record. The press will have a field day with the story of how Robert Maxwell's business empire was actually built by his wife. How does that benefit either of us? A tense silence stretched between us. I could almost see the wheels turning in Andrew's mind as he weighed his options. Finally, he stood, straightening his suit jacket. I need time to consider this proposition. Take all the time you need, I replied. But the house showings scheduled for Friday will be canceled, and any discussions with Harrington Global will be paused until we reach an agreement. Those are my non-negotiable terms for keeping this conversation private. Andrew's jaw worked as he struggled to maintain his composure. Fine. The showings will be postponed, but this isn't over. No, I agreed as he strode toward the door. It's just beginning. After he left, I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had gone better than I dared hope. Andrew was at least considering my claims rather than dismissing them outright. But I harbored no illusions about what lay ahead. My son had inherited his father's stubbornness, along with his tailored suits. I poured myself a small glass of Robert's scotch and raised it in a silent toast. You should have told him while you were alive, I murmured. It would have been easier coming from you. As I sat there in the growing darkness, I couldn't help but wonder if Robert had somehow anticipated this conflict. Had he known that Andrew would try to push me aside after his death? Had the heart attack simply come before he could set things right? I would never know. What I did know was that for the first time in 35 years, I was fighting openly for recognition of my work. And despite everything, the betrayal, the pain, the uncertain future, that felt strangely liberating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Andrew might rally the company lawyers against me. He might go public with accusations that I was having a mental breakdown following Robert's death. He might find ways to block my access to additional evidence. But for tonight, I allowed myself to simply sit in Robert's favorite chair, in the home we had built together, and acknowledge a simple truth. I was done being invisible. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Margaret, Robert's executive assistant. Diana, I'm so sorry to call this early, she said, her voice hushed. But you need to know. Andrew has called an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock this morning. My stomach tightened. Did he say why? Officially to discuss family succession matters. Unofficially, she paused. He's been in his office since dawn with the legal team. Something about updating the company bylaws. He's trying to block me, I realized aloud. Thank you, Margaret. I owe you. You and Robert were always kind to me, she replied simply. Unlike some people. The implication was clear. After hanging up, I called Michael Richardson immediately. Andrew's making a preemptive move, I explained. Can he change the company bylaws to prevent me from claiming a stake? Potentially, Michael said. Depending on how the original corporate charter was structured. But Diana, any changes would require board approval. The board is filled with Robert's old golf buddies and business associates, I reminded him, men who have always seen me as nothing more than Robert's decorative wife. Then perhaps it's time they saw you differently, Michael suggested. You have evidence of your role. Why not present it directly to the board? The idea was bold, perhaps too bold. Walk into the boardroom, the same boardroom where I'd only ever appeared to bring birthday cakes or announce charity gala details and demand recognition as the true financial architect of Maxwell Investments? Yet what choice did I have? Andrew was moving quickly to solidify his control. If I waited, even for a few days, I might lose any leverage I had. I need to get into that meeting, I said. As your attorney, I advise against confronting the board without proper legal preparation, Michael cautioned. But if you're determined, I'll accompany you. 90 minutes later, Michael and I walked into Maxwell Tower. This time, I made no attempt to be discreet. I dressed in one of my most elegant suits, power attire I usually reserved for major charity functions, and held my head high as we crossed the lobby. Mrs. Maxwell, Jennifer the receptionist greeted me nervously. The board meeting has already started and I wasn't told to expect you. That's all right, Jennifer, I said pleasantly. They're discussing family matters, and I'm still family last I checked. Before she could object, Michael and I stepped into the waiting elevator. As the doors closed, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Remember, Michael murmured, you have every right to be heard. This company exists largely because of your financial acumen. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor. The boardroom doors were closed, but through the glass walls I could see Andrew standing at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically. Around the table sat 12 men in near-identical dark suits, the Maxwell Investments Board of Directors. Men who had attended my dinner parties, who had complimented my hosting skills, who had never once imagined I might understand the financial discussions they had with my husband over brandy and cigars. Margaret caught sight of me from her desk and hurried over. Diana, they've specifically instructed me not to allow interruptions. I understand, Margaret, but this can't wait. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. It's not your fault. I'm going in anyway. Michael and I pushed through the heavy doors, causing an immediate hush to fall over the room. Andrew's presentation halted mid-sentence as every head turned toward us. Mother, Andrew said, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is a closed board meeting. You'll have to leave. Actually, I replied calmly, as the widow of the company's founder and a significant stakeholder in this discussion, I believe I have the right to be heard. William Hargrove, the board chairman and one of Robert's oldest friends, rose to his feet. Diana, my dear, this is most irregular. We're in the middle of some rather technical discussions. Technical discussions about changing the company bylaws to prevent me from claiming my rightful place in this company, I said, looking him directly in the eye. Yes, I'm aware. Murmurs rippled around the table. Michael stepped forward, introducing himself as my attorney, which prompted more concerned glances among the board members. Gentlemen, I continued, moving to stand at the opposite end of the table from Andrew. I understand my presence here is unexpected, but what you're discussing today, the future of Maxwell Investments, directly concerns me in ways you may not fully comprehend. Mother, Andrew interrupted, this isn't the time or place. It's exactly the time and place, I countered. Before you vote on any changes to this company's structure, you deserve to know the truth about who built it. I opened my portfolio and withdrew the files I had retrieved the previous day, passing them to William Hargrove. For 35 years, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I have been the primary financial strategist behind Maxwell Investments' most successful ventures. Those files contain the evidence, market analyses, investment strategies, acquisition plans, all created by me, acknowledged by Robert with his blue dot system. The boardroom erupted in confused conversation. Several members reached for the files, examining the pages with bewildered expressions. Andrew's face had gone pale with fury. "This is absurd," he snapped. "My father was a financial genius. He built this company from the ground up." "Your father," I said gently, "was indeed brilliant at relationships, at negotiations, at seeing the big picture. But the detailed financial analysis, the market predictions that made Maxwell Investments so successful, those came from me." William Hargrove adjusted his glasses, studying one of the documents carefully. "Diana, are you suggesting that you were the one who predicted the collapse of the tech bubble in 2000? That was one of Robert's most legendary calls." "Look at the handwriting, William. Look at the date on the analysis. 3 weeks before Robert announced the company's position. And look at the blue dot in the corner, Robert's acknowledgement of my work." As the board members passed the documents among themselves, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Confusion gave way to dawning realization, then to uncomfortable reckoning. These men had known Robert for decades, had seen his brilliance firsthand, but they had also witnessed his occasional inconsistencies, the times when his explanations of complex strategies seemed oddly rehearsed. "Why?" asked James Mitchell, another board veteran. "Why keep this secret all these years?" I sighed, feeling the weight of those decades. It began as a practical arrangement. In the 1980s, when we started the company, the financial world wasn't exactly welcoming to female analysts. Robert had the connections, the charm, the respect of his peers. I had the analytical skills. Together, we created something remarkable. But as time went on, I continued, the deception became our norm. Robert talked about revealing the truth many times, especially in recent years. In fact, I paused, my voice catching slightly. In fact, we had agreed to tell Andrew the truth after Robert returned from London. But then the heart attack happened, and I left the sentence unfinished. The implication was clear. "This changes nothing legally," Andrew insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Whatever assistance my mother may have provided was within the context of their marriage. The company remains mine according to my father's will." Michael stepped forward. "That's not entirely accurate. Under state law, if Mrs. Maxwell can prove she was the de facto chief investment strategist for the company, performing work far beyond the supportive role of a spouse, she may have claim to significant intellectual property rights and compensation for her unacknowledged contributions." "Intellectual property rights?" echoed Harrison Thompson, the board's legal counsel. "You can't be serious." "The Maxwell method," Michael replied, referring to the company's famous investment approach that had been documented in business school case studies. "If Mrs. Maxwell can prove she developed it, which these documents strongly suggest, then the company has been profiting from her intellectual work product for decades without proper attribution or compensation." The board members exchanged alarmed glances. The Maxwell method was the company's crown jewel, its competitive advantage in the marketplace. "Gentlemen," I said, softening my tone, "I'm not here to destroy what Robert and I built together. I'm simply asking for recognition of my role and a fair stake in the company's future." William Hargrove cleared his throat. "I think, given these revelations, we should adjourn to consider the implications. Andrew, Diana, perhaps you two could give the board some privacy to discuss this matter." Andrew looked like he wanted to object, but he recognized the shift in the room. "The board?" Members were rattled, unsure, and suddenly viewing me in an entirely new light. "Fine," he said curtly, "but I expect this board to uphold my father's clearly expressed wishes regarding succession." We stepped out into the hallway, Andrew immediately putting as much distance between us as possible. He paced at the far end, occasionally glancing at me with a mixture of anger and, surprisingly, uncertainty. After nearly an hour, William Hargrove emerged and asked us both to return to the boardroom. The atmosphere had changed palpably. Gone was the casual familiarity with which they had always treated me. Now they regarded me with cautious respect, even wariness. "After reviewing the documents Mrs. Maxwell has provided," William announced, "and considering the potential legal implications, the board proposes the following interim solution. All planned changes to the company bylaws will be suspended pending a full investigation into Mrs. Maxwell's claims. The house will remain in Mrs. Maxwell's possession until ownership can be properly determined, and any discussions regarding potential mergers or acquisitions, including the Harrington Global conversations, will be paused." Andrew started to protest, but William held up a hand to silence him. "Additionally," he continued, "Mrs. Maxwell will be granted temporary observer status at board meetings while this matter is resolved. This arrangement will remain in place for 30 days, during which time we expect both parties to work toward an amicable resolution." It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a start. More importantly, it bought me time. Time to build my case, to gather more evidence, to rally support. "Thank you, gentlemen," I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "I appreciate your willingness to consider my position." As we left the boardroom, Andrew grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. "You've crossed a line," he hissed. "Dad would be ashamed of what you're doing to his legacy." I gently but firmly removed his hand from my arm. "Your father wanted you to know the truth. He was proud of what we built together, and he would have wanted you to understand how it was built, not with one brilliant mind, but with two working in concert." "I don't believe you," Andrew said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. "Check his personal email," I suggested. "The account he kept separate from company servers. Ask yourself why a man who documented everything so meticulously would maintain a private email account that he never shared with the company IT team." Andrew's expression told me my arrow had found its mark. He knew about the private account. Robert had probably given him access after his illness was diagnosed, but he clearly hadn't explored it thoroughly yet. "This isn't over," he warned before stalking away. "No," I agreed quietly. "It's only beginning." Michael escorted me back to the elevator, his expression cautiously optimistic. "That went better than expected. The board is taking your claims seriously." "For now," I said. "But Andrew won't give up easily, and these men have decades of seeing me as nothing more than Robert's wife. Old perceptions don't change overnight." "Then we build an irrefutable case," Michael said firmly. "I'll start the formal legal process today. We'll need expert analysis of the documents, testimony from anyone who knew about your role, a full accounting of your contributions." As we descended in the elevator, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. I had taken my first public step toward claiming my rightful place, and the initial response had been more positive than I'd dared hope. But the road ahead would be challenging, possibly ugly. "There's something else we need to discuss," Michael said as we reached the lobby. "Your own financial position." "What do you mean?" "If this becomes a prolonged legal battle, you'll need resources. I know you mentioned offshore accounts, but are they substantial enough to support both your living expenses and what could be significant legal fees?" It was a fair question. The offshore accounts I had established contained enough to live comfortably for several years, but a protracted legal fight against the full resources of Maxwell Investments could deplete those funds quickly. "I may have another option," I said, thinking of Thomas Jenkins, the former executive who knew about my role. "Let me make a call." That afternoon, I sat in the sunny sitting room of Thomas Jenkins's retirement condo overlooking the bay. Thomas had been Robert's right-hand man for nearly 2 decades before retiring 5 years earlier. He had discovered our arrangement accidentally during a late-night strategy session when Robert had fallen asleep, leaving me to complete the analysis we had been discussing. "I always wondered when this day would come," Thomas said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. When Robert fell ill last year, I asked him directly if he had told Andrew the truth. He assured me he would handle it. He intended to, I said. But time ran out. Thomas nodded sadly. Robert was a remarkable man, in many ways, but he could be conflict-averse, especially with Andrew. Did Robert tell you about the changes he made to his will, giving Andrew complete control? Thomas frowned. No, and I find that surprising. It doesn't align with our last conversation about succession planning. He specifically mentioned creating a role for you on the board, acknowledging your contributions privately, if not publicly. This confirmation of Robert's true intentions strengthened my resolve. Thomas, I need your help. If this goes to court, would you testify about what you know? The older man set down his cup, his expression troubled. Diana, you're asking me to potentially damage Robert's reputation, to tell the world that the great Robert Maxwell wasn't solely responsible for his success. I'm asking you to help preserve what Robert and I built together, I countered. Andrew is already in talks to sell to Harrington Global, something Robert would never have allowed. He's trying to force me out of my home, to erase me from the company's story entirely. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. Harrington Global? Good God. Robert would roll over in his grave. Exactly. This isn't about tarnishing Robert's legacy. It's about protecting it from Andrew's reckless decisions. After a long pause, Thomas nodded. All right. I'll help you. But there's something else I think you should know. He rose and went to his home office, returning with a manila envelope. Robert gave this to me about 6 months ago, after his first heart scare. He asked me to hold it for safekeeping, and to give it to you if anything happened to him before he could set things right, as he put it. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Robert's distinctive handwriting, dated just 5 months before his death. My dearest Diana, if you're reading this, it means I've failed in my promise to finally acknowledge your role in building Maxwell Investments. For that, I am profoundly sorry. When we began our arrangement all those years ago, it seemed a practical solution to the realities of our time. You had the analytical mind I lacked. I had the connections and credibility you were denied simply because of your gender. Together, we created something extraordinary, but what began as a pragmatic partnership became, I'm ashamed to say, a comfortable deception that I allowed to continue far too long. I convinced myself it was necessary for the company's stability, for Andrew's sense of heritage, for the market's confidence. The truth is, I also enjoyed the acclaim, the reputation as a financial visionary that rightfully belonged to you. I've instructed Thomas to provide you with access to a private account I've maintained separately from our family assets. In it, you'll find $10 million, a small percentage of what your work has truly been worth, but enough to ensure your independence should the worst happen before I can make proper amends. The account information is enclosed. The funds are yours alone, untraceable to Maxwell Investments or our family holdings. If I've failed to tell Andrew the truth, please show him this letter. He deserves to know that the business acumen he so admires came not just from me, but from the remarkable woman who has stood quietly beside me all these years. With deepest gratitude and love, Robert tears blurred my vision as I read the final lines. After all these years, Robert had acknowledged the truth. If only in a letter I was never meant to read while he lived. He did care, I whispered, more to myself than to Thomas. In his own way. Thomas handed me a tissue. Robert was complicated, flawed, certainly, but he respected your mind enormously. That I know for certain. Enclosed with the letter was account information for a private Swiss bank. $10 million, not nearly equivalent to my true contribution to the Maxwell fortune, but enough to fight Andrew on equal footing. Enough to ensure I wouldn't be pressured into an unfair settlement due to financial constraints. Thank you for this, I said to Thomas, carefully refolding the letter. "It changes everything." "What will you do? Now?" he asked. I tucked the letter into my purse, a new determination filling me. "First, I'm going to secure my position. Then I'm going to save the company from Andrew's short-sighted plans. And finally," I met Thomas's gaze steadily, "I'm going to claim my rightful place as the financial mind behind Maxwell Investments." As I drove home, Robert's letter resting in my purse like a talisman, I felt a shifting of the ground beneath me. The rules had changed. For decades, I had played by an unwritten code: be supportive, stay in the background, let Robert shine. Now I was writing new rules, stepping into the light, refusing to be sidelined in the story of my own life. The mansion came into view as I turned into the driveway. The home Robert and I had shared for 20 years, the home Andrew had tried to sell out from under me. I noticed with satisfaction that the security guards were gone, evidence that the board's intervention had already taken effect. Inside, I went straight to Robert's study and opened his laptop. I knew his passwords. I had always known them, just as he had known mine. Our secret partnership had required complete transparency between us, even as we maintained the public fiction of our traditional roles. I navigated to his private email account, the one he had kept separate from company servers. There, I found years of our correspondence, detailed discussions of investment strategies, market analyses, acquisition plans, hundreds of emails documenting my role as the true financial strategist behind Maxwell Investments. I began forwarding key emails to my personal account, creating a backup of the evidence. As I worked, I came across a folder labeled simply D Future. Inside were documents Robert had prepared but never shared with me. A draft board resolution acknowledging my role as chief investment strategist, a press release announcing my appointment to the board, even a revised company history that included my contributions. He had been preparing to tell the truth. He had just run out of time. I sat back in Robert's chair, emotions washing over me in waves. Grief for the husband who had finally decided to right a decades-long wrong, only to die before he could. Anger at the son who was so eager to erase me from the picture. And underneath it all, a steely determination to finish what Robert had started, to claim my rightful place in the company we had built together. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Catherine. "How did the board meeting go?" she asked without preamble. "Better than expected," I replied. "They've put a hold on Andrew's plans while they investigate my claims, and I've found something else. Evidence that Robert was planning to acknowledge my role before he died. So what's your next move?" I looked at the laptop screen, at the folder containing Robert's unrealized plans for my future. "I'm going to do what Robert intended. I'm going to take my place at Maxwell Investments, not as the founder's widow, but as the financial strategist who helped build it from the ground up." "And Andrew?" I sighed, thinking of my son, the baby I had cradled, the boy I had raised, the man who now viewed me as an obstacle to his ambition. Andrew has a choice to make. He can accept the truth and work with me to protect his father's legacy, or he can fight me and risk losing everything. As the sun set outside Robert's study window, casting long shadows across the room, I felt oddly at peace. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in 35 years, I was walking it in my own name, not hidden in Robert's. Joe, the invisible woman, was stepping into the light at last. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret. Victor Harrington in Andrew's office. Heated discussion. "Thought you should know." I thanked her for the information, then called Michael Richardson immediately. "Andrew's still pursuing the Harrington deal despite the board's directive to pause," I explained. "We need to act quickly." "I've prepared the court filings," Michael replied. "But before we take that step, have you considered a more direct approach? The evidence you've gathered, Robert's letter, the email correspondence, the offshore account, gives you significant leverage. I thought about it. A court battle would be messy, public, and potentially damaging to the company. If there was a way to resolve this privately, it would be better for everyone. What do you suggest? A formal meeting with Andrew and his attorneys. Present all your evidence at once, then offer a compromise that allows you both to save face. I agreed to his plan, and Michael arranged the meeting for that afternoon. While waiting, I continued exploring Robert's private email account, downloading and organizing evidence. I discovered something unexpected: recent communications between Robert and the board chairman, William Hargrove, discussing my potential role as chief investment officer after Robert stepped back from day-to-day operations. She's always been the analytical backbone of this company, Robert had written. It's time the world knew it. This evidence of Robert's intentions strengthened my position considerably. By the time I arrived at Michael's office for the meeting with Andrew, I felt fully prepared. Andrew was already there, flanked by two corporate attorneys I recognized from Maxwell Investments' legal department. His expression was cold, defensive. "Let's make this quick," he said as I took my seat across the conference table. "I have a company to run." "Yes, let's," I agreed calmly. "I'll come straight to the point. I have extensive evidence that I was the principal financial strategist behind Maxwell Investments' most successful ventures. This includes Robert's own written acknowledgement of my role." I nodded to Michael, who distributed folders containing copies of key documents, the blue-dotted analyses, excerpts from Robert's private emails, and, most damning, a copy of Robert's letter detailing our arrangement. Additionally, I continued as Andrew and his lawyers flipped through the materials with growing concern, I have Thomas Jenkins prepared to testify about his knowledge of our arrangement, going back nearly 20 years. One of Andrew's attorneys leaned over to whisper something in his ear. His face darkened. "This changes nothing legally," Andrew insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dad's will is clear." "Actually," Michael interjected, "there are several legal questions at play here. Intellectual property rights to the Maxwell method, compensation for decades of unacknowledged work, and perhaps most immediately relevant, your father's mental state when signing those recent documents giving you complete control." Andrew's head snapped up. "What are you implying?" "Simply that these materials suggest your father intended a very different succession plan than what was ultimately executed. A plan that included Diana in a significant leadership role. The timing and circumstances of those changes could be grounds for challenging the will and recent corporate restructuring." The older of Andrew's two attorneys cleared his throat. "We should discuss this privately, Mr. Maxwell." "There's nothing to discuss," Andrew snapped. "This is emotional manipulation, not legal evidence." I leaned forward, meeting my son's gaze directly. "Andrew, I'm not trying to take the company from you. I never have been. All I've wanted is recognition for my work and a fair stake in what Robert and I built together." "If that were true," he countered, "why keep it secret all these years? Why wait until Dad died to suddenly claim you were the genius behind everything?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself many times over the past weeks. "Because that was our arrangement," I said quietly. Robert had the public presence, the business relationships, the credibility in a world that wasn't ready to accept a woman in that role. I had the analytical skills he lacked. Together, we created something neither of us could have built alone. "It was a different era when your parents started the company," Michael added. "Women in finance faced barriers that are difficult to imagine today." Andrew scoffed. "So convenient. No way to verify your claims because the only other person who supposedly knew the truth is dead." "Not the only person," I corrected him. "Thomas Jenkins knows. And there's substantial documentary evidence spanning decades." "Circumstantial," he dismissed. "Nothing that would hold up in court." "Perhaps," Michael conceded. But consider the public relations aspect, Andrew. How would the markets react to a prolonged legal battle over who truly created the Maxwell method? What would happen to the company's stock when Diana presents her evidence publicly? How would your clients feel about the uncertainty? This struck a nerve. Andrew was ambitious, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that perception was reality in the financial world, and even the suggestion that Maxwell Investments' legendary investment approach might be attributed to someone other than its namesake would create market uncertainty. "What do you want?" he asked finally, echoing his question from our previous confrontation, but with less hostility and more resignation. "What Robert intended," I replied. "A 40% ownership stake in Maxwell Investments, a seat on the board, the title of chief investment strategist, and my home remains mine permanently." "That's outrageous," Andrew protested. "You're asking for nearly half the company." "I'm asking for less than half of what I helped create," I countered, "and significantly less than what I could potentially claim in court." The younger attorney leaned toward Andrew. "Mr. Maxwell, given the evidence presented, this offer is actually quite reasonable. A court battle would be costly, unpredictable, and potentially damaging to the company regardless of outcome." Andrew stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us as he processed his options. The silence stretched uncomfortably before he finally turned around. 25%, he said. "A non-voting board seat, and you can keep the house." 35%, I countered. "A full voting board seat, the house, and the title of Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, with mandatory consultation on major acquisitions or strategic changes." Andrew's jaw worked as he considered this. "And the Harrington deal?" "Off the table," I said firmly. "Robert would never have approved it, and neither will I." After another tense silence, Andrew nodded curtly. "Fine, have the paperwork drawn up, but I want your public acknowledgement that I remain CEO with full operational control." "Agreed," I said, extending my hand across the table. After a moment's hesitation, Andrew shook it. A businesslike gesture devoid of warmth, but a resolution nonetheless. As the attorneys discussed next steps, Andrew pulled me aside. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice lower than before, almost vulnerable. "All those years, watching Dad aspiring to be like him, why didn't you let me see the truth?" The question hit me with unexpected force. Why hadn't I? To protect Robert's ego? To maintain family harmony? Or had there been something more selfish in my silence? A fear that my son might value me less if he knew I was more than just his mother? "It was complicated," I said finally. "When you were young, the arrangement was still new, still evolving. By the time you were old enough to understand, the narrative was firmly established. Robert was the financial wizard. I was the supportive wife. But you let me believe a lie," Andrew insisted. "You let me build my entire identity around following in Dad's footsteps, becoming the next great Maxwell financial mind when all along, you could have been learning from me too," I finished gently. "You're right. That was wrong of both of us, and I'm sorry for my part in it." Something shifted in Andrew's expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I need time to process all this," he said, gesturing vaguely to the folders of evidence. "To reconcile the parents I thought I knew with whatever this was." "I understand," I said. "And Andrew? Despite everything, I'm proud of you. You're a talented executive in your own right. Different from Robert, different from me, but valuable. To the company in ways neither of us could be." He nodded stiffly, then rejoined the attorneys without further comment. We spent the next hour outlining the specifics of our agreement, which Michael would formalize into legal documents. By late afternoon, we had a framework in place. I would retain my home. I would receive a 35% ownership stake in Maxwell Investments, drawn partially from Andrew's inheritance and partially from Treasury shares. I would join the board with full voting rights and hold the title of Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, with specific powers regarding major strategic decisions. In exchange, I would publicly support Andrew's position as CEO and work with him to ensure a smooth transition that preserved the company's market standing. As we prepared to leave, Andrew turned to me. "There's a board meeting tomorrow at 10. I expect you'll want to be there when we announce these changes." It wasn't exactly an olive branch, but it was an acknowledgement of my new reality. I nodded. "I'll be there." On the drive home, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a lingering sadness. The relationship with my son had been fundamentally altered. The easy maternal love that had defined our bond for 32 years had been replaced by something more complicated, more businesslike. We had become, in essence, business partners with a shared history rather than mother and son. Had it been worth it? The question haunted me as I walked through the silent hallways of my home, still my home, secured at last. By standing up for myself, for my work, for my rightful place in the Maxwell legacy, I had sacrificed something precious. Catherine called that evening, eager to hear the outcome. "It's done," I told her. "We've reached an agreement. 35% ownership, board seat. My position as chief investment strategist recognized officially. And I keep the house." "Diana, that's incredible," she exclaimed. "You did it. You claimed your place after all these years." "Yes," I said, my voice revealing more melancholy than triumph. "But at what cost?" There was a pause before Catherine asked gently, "Andrew? He feels betrayed, lied to, and he's not entirely wrong." I sighed. For 32 years, I've been his mother first and foremost. Now suddenly I'm also the woman who created the financial strategies he's been attempting to master his entire career. It's a lot for him to process. "Give him time," Catherine advised. "He's had his entire worldview upended, but he's still your son, and beneath the shock and the corporate power plays, there's still that little boy who worshipped both his parents." I wanted to believe her, but the memory of Andrew's cold, businesslike handshake lingered. This wasn't a rift that would heal quickly, if it healed at all. The next morning, I dressed carefully for the board meeting. A tailored navy suit that I had purchased years ago for a financial charity gala but had rarely worn since. It felt appropriate now, as I stepped into my new role. The atmosphere in the boardroom was noticeably different when I arrived. The men who had previously treated me with casual, somewhat patronizing familiarity now regarded me with a complex mix of emotions: respect, wariness, curiosity, and in some cases, lingering disbelief. William Hargrove pulled me aside before the meeting began. "Diana, I owe you an apology. All these years, sitting across from you at dinner parties, charity events, I never once saw past the facade to the mind beneath." "Few people did," I replied. "That was rather the point, William." He nodded ruefully. "Robert mentioned your financial acumen occasionally, but I assumed he was being a proud husband, not literally crediting you with the company's investment strategy." He shook his head. "Remarkable. And here we all thought we knew Robert so well." "You did know him," I said. "His vision, his leadership style, his ability to connect with people, those were all genuine. Our arrangement simply allowed each of us to focus on our strengths." "Still," William said, "I can't help but wonder how many other women like you are out there. Brilliant minds working in the shadows while men take the credit." "More than you might imagine," I replied, thinking of the countless corporate wives I'd met over the years, women with advanced degrees and sharp intellects who had sublimated their own ambitions to support their husbands' careers. How many of them had arrangements similar to mine? How many had contributed far more than the world would ever know? The board meeting began precisely at 10. Andrew called it to order, his manner professional if somewhat strained. "Gentlemen," he began. As you're aware, recent days have brought significant revelations regarding my mother's role in Maxwell Investments' history and success. He paused, visibly working to maintain his composure. After extensive discussion and review of evidence, we have reached an agreement that acknowledges her contributions while ensuring stability for the company moving forward. Andrew outlined the terms we had negotiated, presenting them as a mutual decision rather than a concession forced by my evidence. The board members listened intently, occasionally glancing between Andrew and me as if trying to reconcile this new reality with their long-held perceptions. Additionally, Andrew continued, I am withdrawing my proposal regarding potential strategic alignment with Harrington Global. After careful consideration, I've determined it's not in line with our long-term corporate vision. This last part was delivered with a subtle nod in my direction, an acknowledgement that my opposition to the deal had been a factor in his decision. It was a small gesture, but it suggested that perhaps there was hope for a working relationship between us, even if our personal bond remained strained. When Andrew finished, William Hargrove spoke up. I moved to formally welcome Diana Maxwell to the board and to create the position of Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, as outlined. All in favor? The vote was unanimous, though I noted varying degrees of enthusiasm among the members. Some seemed genuinely pleased by this resolution. Others merely resigned to it as the path of least resistance. Congratulations, Diana, William said warmly. Or perhaps I should say, it's about time. After the meeting adjourned, Andrew approached me. Your office is being prepared on the executive floor, he said. Margaret suggested using the corner suite that's been vacant since Thomas retired. It has a good view of the harbor. Thank you, I replied, touched by this unexpected consideration. That would be perfect. We stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to navigate this new dynamic. I canceled all pending showings of the house, Andrew added, and the security team has been instructed that you have full access to all company facilities and information systems. I appreciate that. Another pause, heavy with unspoken emotions. This is strange for me, Andrew admitted finally. All my life I've seen you one way. Now I have to recalibrate. I know, I said gently. And I'm sorry for the shock of it. But Andrew, nothing about who I am has actually changed. I'm still the same person who raised you, who loves you. I've just stepped out of the shadows. He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. I have a lunch meeting. We can discuss next steps tomorrow, perhaps. 9 o'clock, my office, or yours, once it's ready. 9 o'clock, I agreed. And Andrew? Thank you for handling this with grace, despite the circumstances. Your father would be proud. A flicker of emotion crossed his face at the mention of Robert, but he merely nodded again before walking away. As I watched him go, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and loss. I had won recognition for my work, secured my rightful place in the company, ensured my financial independence. But something precious had been altered between my son and me. A simple, uncomplicated love replaced by something more complex, more guarded. Margaret approached as I gathered my things. Your office should be ready by tomorrow afternoon, she said warmly. I took the liberty of ordering some furnishings similar to what you have in your home study. I hope that's all right. That's very thoughtful, Margaret. Thank you. She lowered her voice. For what it's worth, many of us who worked closely with Robert suspected something like this. The way he always rushed home to think things over before making major decisions. The way his explanations of complex strategies sometimes seemed rehearsed. I raised an eyebrow. And yet no one said anything. She shrugged. It wasn't our place. And honestly, I think most of us found it rather romantic, this brilliant partnership disguised as a traditional marriage. I had never thought of it as romantic. Practical, certainly, necessary, given the realities of the time. But romantic? The idea gave me pause. Perhaps there was something romantic about it, I conceded. Two people combining their strengths, covering each other's weaknesses, building something together that neither could have created alone. Exactly, Margaret smiled. And now you get to continue that legacy, but in your own name. It's a beautiful full circle. As I left Maxwell Tower that day, I felt a weight lifting, the burden of invisibility I had carried for 35 years. Tomorrow, I would return not as Robert Maxwell's widow, but as Diana Maxwell, Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, board member, and acknowledged architect of the Maxwell Method. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Rebuilding my relationship with Andrew. Earning the genuine respect of board members who had only ever seen me as a corporate wife. Stepping into the public eye after decades in the shadows. But for the first time, I would face those challenges standing in my own light, not Robert's. That evening, as the sun set over the garden of the home I had fought to keep, I opened a bottle of champagne. The same vintage Robert and I had shared when celebrating our first major acquisition. I poured 2 glasses, placing one at the empty chair across from mine. "We did it, Robert," I said softly. "Not the way we planned, but we got there in the end." The house was quiet, filled with the memories of our shared life, both the public story everyone knew and the private truth that had finally emerged. In that moment of solitude, I allowed myself to feel everything: the grief for what I had lost, the pride in what I had accomplished, and the hope for what still lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to shape the legacy Robert and I had built together. But tonight, I simply savored the knowledge that after decades of working in the shadows, Diana Maxwell had finally stepped into the light. And the view, I had to admit, was rather spectacular. The next morning, I arrived at Maxwell Tower at precisely 8:45, allowing myself time to absorb the reality of my new position before meeting with Andrew. The security guard at the executive elevator, who had previously required me to sign in as a visitor, now stood a little straighter as I approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Maxwell," he said, with newfound respect in his voice. "Your access has been programmed into the system. You can use your fingerprint from now on." I placed my thumb on the small scanner, watching as the light turned green and the elevator doors opened automatically. This small technological acknowledgement of my belonging felt strangely significant. Margaret met me in the reception area, her smile warm and genuine. "Your office isn't quite ready yet, but I've arranged for you to use the executive conference room until then. Andrew is expecting you." I followed her through the maze of glass-walled offices that made up the executive floor. Employees looked up from their desks as I passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to surprise to, in a few cases, skepticism. News of my new role had clearly spread throughout the building. Andrew was waiting in his office, Robert's old office, I reminded myself, standing by the window overlooking the city skyline. He turned as I entered, his face carefully composed into a professional mask. "Good morning," he said, gesturing to the sitting area rather than the more formal arrangement of chairs in front of his desk. "Would you like coffee?" "Please," I replied, taking a seat on the sleek leather sofa. It was strange being here as a colleague rather than a visitor, a board member rather than just the CEO's mother. Andrew poured coffee from a carafe on the side table, handing me a cup before sitting across from me. "I've been thinking about how to announce your new position to the company and the market," he began. "All business. The board suggests a joint press release explaining your historical role and new official position." "That seems appropriate," I agreed. "Though we should be careful about how we frame the narrative. We don't want to undermine confidence in the Maxwell method by suggesting it's changing hands." Andrew nodded. "Exactly my concern. We need to position this as a formalization of an existing partnership, not a revelation that changes the fundamental nature of the company. Perhaps we emphasize continuity, I suggested, that Robert and I developed the Maxwell method together, and that my official recognition ensures its authentic continuation. That could work. Andrew made a note on his tablet. The PR team has drafted some language. I'll have them send it to you for review before we release anything. We spent the next hour discussing practical matters. The departments I would oversee directly, the types of decisions that would require my consultation, how we would communicate with the board about our new power-sharing arrangement. Andrew was meticulous, professional, and utterly distant. Finally, as our meeting wound down, I decided to address the elephant in the room. Andrew, I said gently, we need to talk about the personal aspect of this situation. We can't just pretend. The last few weeks didn't happen. His face tightened. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. We've reached a business arrangement that satisfies both our interests. This isn't just business, Andrew. You're my son. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Am I? Because lately it feels like I never really knew you at all. The hurt in his voice was unmistakable beneath the cool exterior. You've known the essential me your entire life, I said. The woman who raised you, who loved you, who supported your dreams. The only thing you didn't know was the full extent of my professional capabilities. That's quite an understatement, don't you think? Andrew stood, pacing restlessly. I built my entire career trying to live up to Dad's legacy, trying to master the Maxwell method, believing I was following in his footsteps. Do you have any idea how it feels to learn that the financial genius I've been trying to emulate all these years wasn't even him? I absorbed his words, recognizing the genuine pain behind them. I understand that this has shaken your sense of identity, Andrew. And for that, I am truly sorry. Your father and I should have been honest with you years ago. Why weren't you? He demanded. Why perpetuate this fiction for decades? Was it amusing for you, watching me struggle to grasp concepts that came naturally to you? Of course not, I replied, stung by the accusation. The arrangement began long before you were born, when the financial world was very different for women. By the time you were old enough to understand, the narrative was firmly established. And yes, that was wrong of us. We should have trusted you with the truth. Andrew fell silent, digesting this. Finally, he asked, Did Dad ever intend to tell me? Or was that just something you claimed to strengthen your position? I reached into my bag and withdrew Robert's letter. The original, not the copy we had included in the settlement materials. Read it yourself, I said, holding it out to him. Your father's words, in his own handwriting. Andrew hesitated, then took the letter. I watched his face as he read, seeing the subtle shifts in his expression as he absorbed Robert's confession and apology. When he finished, he didn't immediately speak, just set the letter carefully on the coffee table between us. He really did respect your mind, Andrew said finally, a note of wonder in his voice. This isn't just politeness or guilt. He genuinely admired your financial acumen. Yes, I agreed. Just as he genuinely admired your leadership abilities. Robert always said you had natural talents that neither of us possessed. Your ability to inspire people, to build teams, to see the human element in business decisions. Andrew looked up sharply. He said that? I nodded. Many times. He was incredibly proud of you, Andrew. Not because you were following in his footsteps, but because you were creating your own path. Something shifted in Andrew's expression, a softening, a crack in the wall of resentment he had built. I always thought he was disappointed that I wasn't more like him, that I couldn't seem to grasp the financial strategies as intuitively as he did. Not at all, I assured him. He valued your different strengths. That's why he was so confident in your ability to lead the company. Not because you would replicate his approach, but because you would bring something new to it. Andrew sat back down, rubbing his face tiredly. This is a lot to process. Everything. I thought I knew about our family, about the company history. I know, I said sympathetically. And I'm not asking for instant forgiveness or understanding. I just want you to know that despite the deception about my professional role, my love for you has always been completely genuine. Nothing about that has changed. He nodded slowly, not quite ready to reciprocate the sentiment, but at least acknowledging it. I need time. Of course, I agreed, standing to leave. We'll focus on the business transition for now. The rest will come in its own time. As I reached the door, Andrew called after me. Diana? I turned, startled by his use of my first name rather than mother. Thank you for showing me the letter, he said quietly. It helps to know Dad was planning to tell me himself. It was a small olive branch, but one I gratefully accepted. You're welcome, Andrew. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I established myself in my new official role. My office, Thomas Jenkins's old corner suite, was furnished with an elegant blend of traditional and modern elements, reflecting both my history with the company and my new forward-looking position. We issued the press release announcing my role as Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, carefully crafting the narrative to emphasize continuity while acknowledging my historical contributions. To our relief, the market response was generally positive. There was some initial volatility as investors processed the news, but the share price stabilized after I gave several strategic interviews explaining how the Maxwell method had always been a collaborative approach that would continue unchanged. The media, predictably, was fascinated by the story. The woman behind the Maxwell fortune blared one headline. Financial world's best-kept secret revealed, proclaimed another. I declined most interview requests, but did agree to a carefully managed profile in the Financial Times that positioned my emergence as a natural evolution rather than a shocking revelation. Within the company, reactions were mixed. Some employees, particularly women in the analyst division, were visibly energized by the revelation that a woman had been the true architect of the firm's investment strategy. Others, especially those who had built their careers around Robert's mentorship, seemed uncertain how to relate to me. I made a point of meeting with each department head individually, listening to their concerns, and assuring them that my new role was not about disrupting what worked, but rather about strengthening it for the future. Gradually, the initial awkwardness gave way to a cautious acceptance, and in some cases, genuine enthusiasm. Margaret proved invaluable during this transition, helping me navigate the corporate culture from the inside rather than the periphery where I had existed for so long. She introduced me to key personnel, explained the unwritten rules of the executive floor, and offered candid assessments of which managers genuinely supported my role and which merely paid lip service to it. Johnson in fixed income is your biggest skeptic, she informed me over lunch in my new office. He was Robert's golf buddy for 15 years, and he's having trouble reconciling the Robert he knew with the idea that you were the analytical force behind his decisions. And Thomas Lambert in equities? I asked, referring to a brilliant but somewhat prickly analyst Robert had recruited from a competitor. Margaret smiled. Completely won over. He says your analysis of the Asian markets was the most insightful. He's read in years. He's already asked if you'd consult on a new strategy his team is developing. Set that up for next week, I decided. And perhaps we should invite Johnson to present his current projects as well. The more he sees me engage substantively with the work, the easier it will be for him to accept my role. My relationship with Andrew remained professional but distant. We met 3 times a week to discuss company matters, carefully avoiding personal topics. I could sense him watching me during board meetings and strategy sessions, his expression thoughtful as I articulated investment theories or questioned market projections. He was seeing me through new eyes, still adjusting to the reality of who I had always been beneath the maternal role he had known. About a month into my new position, I received an unexpected visitor. Melissa, Andrew's wife, appeared at my office. One afternoon, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Do you have a moment?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the sitting area by the window. "Please, come in." Melissa perched on the edge of a chair, her usual polished confidence noticeably absent. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "The way I spoke to you about downsizing and moving to a seniors community, it was disrespectful and presumptuous." I studied her face, searching for the motivation behind this sudden contrition. "Thank you for saying that," I said cautiously. "Andrew doesn't know I'm here," she added, answering my unspoken question. "This isn't about him or the company. It's personal." That caught my interest. Melissa and I had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship. She had been friendly enough, but I had always sensed she viewed me primarily as a social asset, the founder's wife who could make useful introductions, rather than someone to connect with genuinely. "I'm listening," I encouraged her. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "When I suggested you should move to that senior's place, I wasn't just being cruel. I was projecting, repeating what my own mother had experienced. This was unexpected. Melissa rarely spoke about her family. My father was a lot like Robert," she continued. "Charismatic, successful, the center of attention. My mother was the quiet one, the organizer, the support system. When he died, my brothers took control of everything, the family business, the properties, the investments. They moved my mother into a small condo and gave her a monthly allowance, exactly like Andrew tried to do with you." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely sympathetic. "That must have been difficult for her." Melissa nodded. "She accepted it, never fought back, never claimed her rightful place. She faded into the background until she became almost invisible. Her eyes met mine directly. But you didn't. You stood your ground. You proved your value. And watching you do that has made me question everything." "What do you mean?" "I've spent 10 years building my life around Andrew's career, his social connections, his ambitions," she explained. "I gave up my own career in design because it didn't fit the image of a Maxwell executive's wife. I've hosted the right parties, joined the right boards, said all the right things to all the right people." I recognized in her words the same pattern I had followed for decades, the sublimation of personal identity for a husband's career advancement. The realization created an unexpected bond between us. "And now?" I prompted gently. "Now I'm wondering what I've sacrificed and whether it was worth it." She smiled ruefully. "I've been taking a hard look at my life since you revealed your true role in Maxwell Investments. It's made me realize I don't want to end up like my mother, or like you were before Robert died, living in the shadows of someone else's success." "Have you talked to Andrew about this?" She shook her head. "Not yet. He's still processing everything with you and the company. But I've started sketching again, reconnecting with my old design school friends. Small steps toward reclaiming parts of myself I set aside." I considered her carefully, seeing beyond the perfect exterior to the genuine struggle beneath. "For what it's worth, Melissa, I think that's wise. My arrangement with Robert worked for us, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a model. There are costs to living in the shadows, even when it's by choice." "That's actually why I came to see you," she admitted. I hoped you might be willing to share your perspective, not as Andrew's mother or as my mother-in-law, but as someone who navigated a similar path and has now found your way back to yourself." The request touched me unexpectedly. For so long, Melissa had been simply an extension of Andrew in my mind, his suitable, socially advantageous wife. Now I was seeing her as an individual with her own struggles and aspirations. "I'd be happy to talk with you about this," I told her sincerely. "Perhaps we could have lunch next week?" Her face brightened. "I'd like that very much." After Melissa left, I sat looking out over the harbor, reflecting on how profoundly everything had changed in just a few short months. My relationship with my daughter-in-law, apparently on the verge of becoming something meaningful. My position in the company, transformed from behind-the-scenes architect to acknowledged leader. My sense of self, evolving daily as I stepped fully into who I had always been in private. The only relationship that remained strained was with Andrew. Though our professional interactions had become smoother, there was still a wall between us personally, a barrier of hurt, betrayal, and unresolved emotions. Later that afternoon, I received an email from him that suggested the first potential crack in that wall. Diana, the board has requested that we present jointly at next month's leadership retreat. The topic is the evolution of the Maxwell method. They specifically want us to discuss how my leadership style complements the investment approach you and Dad developed. I'd like to have dinner to discuss this further. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. at Everett's? Just the two of us. Andrew, it wasn't exactly a peace offering, but it was an acknowledgement that we needed to find a way forward together, professionally if not yet personally. I responded immediately, accepting the invitation. Everett's was a quiet, upscale restaurant where Robert and I had often celebrated company milestones. I arrived precisely at 7 to find Andrew already waiting at a corner table, nursing a scotch, Robert's preferred drink, I noted with a pang. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I've ordered wine for the table. The Bordeaux you usually prefer." I was touched that he remembered. "Thank you, Andrew." After the waiter had poured the wine and taken our orders, Andrew got straight to business. "The leadership retreat is important. It's the first time the entire management team will see us working together in our new arrangement." "I agree," I said. "We need to present a united front, demonstrate that the transition has been smooth and that the Maxwell method remains intact." Andrew nodded. "I've been thinking about how to structure the presentation. What if we approach it as a dialogue? I discuss the leadership principles, you explain the analytical framework, and together we demonstrate how they intersect." "That's an excellent approach," I agreed. "It would highlight both our contributions without suggesting competition or conflict." We spent the next hour outlining the presentation, finding a natural rhythm in our professional collaboration. Andrew was insightful about organizational dynamics, while I contributed the deeper investment philosophy. The wine flowed, the initial tension eased, and for brief stretches it felt almost normal between us. As dessert arrived, Andrew finally broached the personal topic that had been hovering unspoken all evening. "I've been going through Dad's private email archives," he said, setting down his fork, "reading your exchanges about investment strategies, acquisition targets, market trends." I waited, unsure where he was going with this. "It's extraordinary," he continued. "The depth of analysis, the precision of your projections, the way you anticipated market shifts months before they occurred." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I knew Dad was brilliant, but reading these exchanges, it's clear that much of what I attributed to him was actually you. "We were partners," I said carefully. "Different but complementary minds working together." "Yes, I see that now." Andrew took a sip of his wine. "But what's most striking is how he wrote to you, not as a husband to a wife, but as one intellectual equal to another. There's such respect in his tone, such genuine appreciation for your perspective." "Robert and I had a complex relationship," I acknowledged. "In many ways traditional, but in this one area, we were true equals." Andrew considered this. "I've been angry about the deception, about being kept in the dark for so long, but reading these emails, I'm beginning to understand why it evolved as it did. It was the first real softening I'd seen in him since the confrontation began." "I wish we had told you sooner," I said sincerely. "That's my biggest regret in all of this." "Mine too," he admitted quietly. We fell silent for a moment, both caught in private reflections. Finally, Andrew spoke again. "I can't promise that things will ever be exactly as they were between us," he said carefully. but I am trying to see beyond my initial reaction to understand the fuller picture of our family history. That's all I can ask, I replied. And perhaps in time, we'll build something new. A relationship based on who we truly are, not the roles we thought we were supposed to play. Andrew raised his glass. To truth, however uncomfortable, and to the future of Maxwell Investments. Touched my glass to his. To truth, and to new beginnings. As we left the restaurant, Andrew hesitated on the sidewalk, seeming to wrestle with something. Then, with a small sigh, he leaned in and kissed my cheek, the first affectionate gesture he had offered since our conflict began. "Good night, Mom," he said, the familiar address clearly deliberate. "Good night, Andrew," I replied, my heart lightening at this small but significant olive branch. Driving home, I reflected on how far we had all come in such a short time. 2 months ago, I had been invisible, the founder's widow, the CEO's mother, defined entirely by my relationship to the men in my life. Now I was Diana Maxwell, Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus, recognized for my own intellect and contributions. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. There were still board members to win, over market perceptions to manage, a complex relationship with my son to rebuild. But for the first time in my adult life, I was walking that road fully visible, fully acknowledged, fully myself. As I pulled into the driveway of the home I had fought to keep, I felt a sense of profound gratitude wash over me. Not just for the material security I had won, but for the liberation that had come with it. The freedom to be seen, to be known, to be valued for my mind, rather than just my supporting role. Robert and I had built something remarkable together, a financial empire. Yes, but also a complex partnership that had evolved over decades of shared ambition and mutual respect. Now, stepping out of his shadow at last, I would honor that partnership by leading the next phase of our legacy, this time, in my own name, with my own voice. The invisible woman had finally claimed her rightful place in the light. And the view, I had to admit, was spectacular. 3 months into my official role at Maxwell Investments, I faced my first major test. The quarterly earnings report was due, and it would be the first one released since my position had been made public. The markets were watching closely, investors curious whether the company would maintain its legendary performance now that the truth about the Maxwell method had been revealed. The pressure was immense. If the numbers disappointed, critics would question whether I truly possessed the financial acumen attributed to me. If they exceeded expectations, skeptics might suggest we were manipulating figures to validate my role. Either way, the scrutiny would be unlike anything the company had faced before. I spent long nights in my office, reviewing every aspect of our portfolio, searching for potential weaknesses or overlooked opportunities. The analysis came naturally, as it always had, but the stakes felt dramatically different. For decades, I had worked in private, my mistakes and successes alike hidden, behind Robert's public persona. Now my judgment would be evaluated directly, publicly, by the entire financial world. Andrew and I established a new routine during this period, meeting each morning to review the previous day's market movements and adjust our strategies accordingly. These sessions were strictly professional, but increasingly comfortable as we found our rhythm as colleagues rather than just mother and son. The technology sector looks vulnerable, I noted during one such meeting, pointing to subtle patterns in the data that suggested a coming correction. We should consider reducing our exposure before the earnings report. Andrew studied the figures, his expression thoughtful. The indicators are subtle. Most analysts are still bullish on tech. That's precisely the opportunity, I explained. The consensus view often misses early warning signs. This pattern here, I traced a line on the chart, reminds me of movements we saw before the 2018 correction. Not identical, but similar enough to warrant caution. Andrew didn't immediately agree, but he didn't dismiss my concerns either. Instead, he asked probing questions, pushing me to elaborate on my reasoning, challenging my assumptions in ways that sharpened rather than undermined my analysis. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "I'll talk to the sector heads and get their input, but your instinct here is compelling." 2 days later, he implemented the strategy I had suggested, reducing our technology holdings just before a mini-sector correction that would have significantly impacted our quarterly results. It was a small victory, but an important one. The first time Andrew had publicly embraced my financial judgment as chief investment strategist, rather than merely accommodating my new position. When the earnings report was finally released, the numbers were strong, not record-breaking, but solid enough to reassure the markets that Maxwell Investments remained on steady ground despite the leadership transition. The stock price rose modestly, and financial analysts noted approvingly that the company appeared to be navigating its new arrangement successfully. "The Maxwell method remains intact," one prominent analyst wrote, suggesting that Diana Maxwell's role in its development was indeed as substantial as recently revealed. The night after the earnings call, Andrew surprised me by appearing at my door with a bottle of champagne. "I thought we should celebrate," he said, holding up the bottle. The same vintage Robert and I had always chosen for company milestones. "Your first official quarterly report as Chief Investment Strategist Emeritus." The gesture touched me deeply. "That's thoughtful of you, Andrew. Please come in." We settled in the living room, the same room where, months earlier, he had attempted to force me into a seniors community with a monthly allowance. The contrast between that confrontation and this quiet celebration wasn't lost on either of us. "You were right about the tech sector," Andrew acknowledged as he poured the champagne. "That adjustment saved us at least 3 percentage points on the quarterly return." "It was the right call," I agreed, accepting a glass. "But your execution of the shift was masterful. Robert would have been much less subtle about it." Andrew smiled faintly at the mention of his father. Dad did tend to make big moves all at once, never quite mastered the art of the gradual pivot. "That was his style," I said. "Bold, decisive, sometimes dramatic. It served him well in many situations. But not all," Andrew added thoughtfully. "I've been reviewing some of the company's history, acquisitions, major strategy shifts, responses to market disruptions. There's a pattern I never noticed before. Dad's most celebrated decisions, the ones that seemed most brilliantly timed, all have your blue dots on the analysis." I sipped my champagne, neither confirming nor denying his observation. "The moves. That didn't work out as well," he continued. "The ones where the timing was just slightly off, or the execution less than perfect. Those were the ones where he acted without your input, weren't they?" "We had different strengths," I said diplomatically. "Robert had extraordinary instincts about people, about relationships, about the human elements of business. Those can't be quantified in the same way as market patterns." Andrew nodded slowly. "I used to think I was a disappointment to him because I didn't inherit his financial genius. Now I wonder if what he really wanted was for me to recognize the value of partnership, to find my own Diana, so to speak." The insight surprised me. "That's perceptive, Andrew, and not something I had considered before." He never pushed me to marry Melissa, Andrew reflected. But he was unusually supportive of the relationship from the beginning. Perhaps he saw in her qualities that complemented mine, the way yours complemented his. I thought of my recent lunch with Melissa, where she had shared her frustrations about sublimating her design career for Andrew's professional advancement. There were parallels to my own history with Robert, certainly, but also critical differences. "If that was his hope," I said carefully, "he should have been more transparent about the nature of our partnership. You and Melissa deserve to make your choices with full understanding, not based on a sanitized version of our marriage." Andrew studied me over the rim of his glass. "Speaking of Melissa, she mentioned you two had lunch recently." Yes, I confirmed, wondering if this would become a point of tension. She reached out to me. I hope that was all right. To my surprise, Andrew smiled. More than all right. She came home from that lunch more animated than I've seen her in years. Talking about design concepts, portfolio ideas, reconnecting with her creative roots. She's very talented, I offered. The sketches she showed me were impressive. I never realized how much she'd set aside to fit into the role of Mrs. Maxwell, Andrew admitted. Just as I never realized how much you'd suppressed to be Mrs. Maxwell in an earlier era. This was the most direct acknowledgement he had offered of the personal cost of my arrangement with Robert. Different times, I said simply. Different choices. But the same fundamental mistake, Andrew countered. Allowing outdated expectations to waste extraordinary talent. He set down his glass with sudden decision. I've encouraged Melissa to restart her design practice. The guest room is being converted into a studio for her. This was unexpected. The Andrew who had tried to force me into a retirement community just months ago would never have supported his wife's independent career ambitions. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. She'll thrive with your support. I hope so. He refilled our glasses, his expression turning reflective. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About Dad, about you, about the kind of man, the kind of husband I want to be. I don't want Melissa looking back in 30 years with the same regrets you must have. I wouldn't characterize my life as filled with regret, I clarified. Robert and I made choices that worked for us, for our time. But I am glad that Melissa won't have to make the same compromises. Andrew nodded thoughtfully. Progress, I suppose. Glacially slow, but progress nonetheless. We clinked glasses to that, and for the first time since Robert's death, the silence between us felt comfortable rather than strained. After Andrew left, I sat alone in the quiet house, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. My son, who had once been so desperate to erase me from the company narrative, was now acknowledging my contributions and even supporting his wife's professional aspirations. The board members who had initially viewed my claims with skepticism were now deferring to my judgment on investment matters. The financial press, which had first treated my emergence as a curiosity, was beginning to analyze my strategies with genuine respect. I had won the recognition I deserved. Yet, something still felt incomplete. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual, drawn by an idea that had kept me awake much of the night. Margaret looked surprised to see me at 7:30, but quickly adjusted. "You're in early," she observed, handing me a cup of coffee prepared exactly as I preferred. "Anything I can help with?" "Actually, yes," I replied. "I need you to pull all the information we have on the Maxwell Foundation's current initiatives and funding priorities." The Maxwell Foundation was the charitable arm of the company, established by Robert 15 years earlier. It had always been well-funded but somewhat conservative in its focus, primarily supporting educational scholarships and medical research. Margaret raised an eyebrow, but didn't question the request. "I'll have everything on your desk within the hour." By mid-morning, I was immersed in Foundation documents, studying the current portfolio of charitable projects. As I had suspected, most followed traditional corporate philanthropy models, worthy causes certainly, but lacking a cohesive vision or connection to the issues I had grown to care about over the years. When Andrew appeared for our regular strategy meeting, I surprised him by changing the subject. "I'd like to discuss the Maxwell Foundation," I said, gesturing to the documents spread across my desk. "Specifically, I'm interested in redirecting some of its resources." Andrew looked momentarily taken aback. "The foundation has always been Dad's pet project. He established the funding priorities years ago." "Yes, and they were appropriate for that time," I acknowledged. "But I believe we have an opportunity to create more meaningful impact now, particularly in areas where we have unique expertise. I outlined my vision: a significant new initiative focused on supporting women in finance and investment, scholarships for female business students specializing in financial analysis, mentorship programs connecting established female executives with promising young analysts, research grants examining barriers to women's advancement in the financial sector. The irony isn't lost on me, I admitted with a small smile. After hiding my own financial acumen for decades, I now want to ensure other women don't feel compelled to do the same. But perhaps that's precisely why this matters. I understand the cost of that invisibility firsthand. Andrew listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. It's a departure from Dad's vision for the foundation, he said finally, but a compelling one. What kind of budget are you proposing? I named a figure that represented nearly a third of the foundation's annual disbursement. Ambitious but not unreasonable given the scale of impact I envisioned. Andrew whistled softly. That's substantial. It needs to be, I replied. Token initiatives don't create meaningful change. We have the resources to do this properly, to establish something that could genuinely alter the landscape for women in finance. You'll need board approval for a shift of this magnitude, Andrew pointed out. Yes, I agreed, which is why I'm discussing it with you first. I'd like us to present this jointly at the next board meeting. Andrew considered this, tapping his pen against the desk in a gesture reminiscent of his father. The board's old guard might resist, he warned. Johnson, Hargrove, they still view philanthropy through a traditional lens. All the more reason for you to support it, I countered. Your endorsement would carry significant weight, especially with the more conservative members. He studied me with newfound respect. You're not just claiming your place in the company's past, are you? You're reshaping its future. Is that a problem? I asked directly. After a brief pause, Andrew shook his head. No, in fact, it's exactly what we need. The Maxwell legacy should evolve, not calcify. He made a decisive note in his planner. I'll support your proposal at the board meeting, and I suggest we name the initiative after you, the Diana Maxwell Women in Finance Program. The suggestion caught me off guard. That's not necessary. This isn't about my name or recognition. Isn't it, though? Andrew challenged gently. Part of changing perceptions is visibility. Young women should know whose vision created this opportunity. For them. Your story, stepping out of the shadows after decades of hidden influence, is powerful. It should be central to the initiative, not an afterthought. His insight struck me deeply. For so long, I had accepted invisibility as the price of influence. The idea of not just claiming credit for past work, but attaching my name to future impact, creating a visible, lasting legacy, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I'll consider it, I said finally. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week. In preparation, Andrew and I worked closely to refine the proposal, anticipating potential objections and developing compelling responses. Our professional rapport strengthened through this collaboration, each of us bringing different perspectives and strengths to the project. The night before the meeting, I had dinner with Catherine, sharing my plans and my lingering concerns. You've secured your position in the company, claimed credit for your past work, established yourself as a respected financial mind, Catherine summarized as we shared a bottle of wine in her kitchen. Why does this foundation initiative matter so much to you? I considered the question carefully. Because recognition for past achievements isn't enough, I said finally. That just corrects a historical wrong. This is about creating something new, something that might prevent other women from facing the same choices I did. Catherine studied me thoughtfully. You know, when you first told me about your arrangement with Robert all those years ago, I thought you were making a terrible mistake. Sublimating your talents, letting him take credit for your work. It seemed like such a waste. You never hid your disapproval, I reminded her with a wry smile. No, I didn't, she acknowledged. but I've been thinking about it differently lately. You found a way to exercise your financial genius in an era that wouldn't have allowed you to do so openly. Was it fair? No. Was it ideal? Absolutely not. But you used the tools available to you, and you built something remarkable. With significant compromises, I pointed out. Yes, Catherine agreed. But now you're in a position to ensure other women won't have to make those same compromises. There's a certain poetry to that, don't you think? Using the fortune you built from the shadows to create pathways for women to succeed in the light. Her framing resonated deeply with me. This wasn't just about philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. It was about transformation. Of the financial industry, yes, but also of my own legacy. Not just the woman behind Robert Maxwell's success, but a force for change in my own right. The board meeting the next day was unlike any I had attended previously. In the past, I had participated as a recent addition, still proving my worth. Today, I presented the Foundation initiative with confidence and authority, my voice steady as I outlined the vision for the Diana Maxwell Women in Finance program. I had decided to accept Andrew's suggestion about the name, recognizing the power of visibility after decades in the shadows. As I spoke, I noticed William Hargrove nodding approvingly, while Harrison Thompson, one of the more traditional board members, looked increasingly thoughtful. When I finished my presentation, Andrew seamlessly took over, addressing the financial and logistical aspects of implementation. Our joint approach sent a clear message. This wasn't just my pet project, but a strategic initiative with the full support of company leadership. The discussion that followed was robust but surprisingly positive. Even Johnson, who had been my most persistent skeptic, acknowledged the potential business benefits of being at the forefront of diversity in finance. The talent pool in our industry is changing, he noted. This positions us to attract the best and brightest of the next generation. When the vote was called, the initiative passed unanimously. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to offer congratulations and suggestions for implementation. For the first time, I felt fully accepted as not just a historical figure in the company's past, but an architect of its future. William Hargrove lingered after the others had left. Robert would be proud, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Not just of the initiative, but of how you've stepped into your own power. Thank you, William, I replied, touched by his words. That means a great deal. He talked about you. You know, William continued. Not about your role in the investment strategies, he kept that promise, but about your intelligence, your insight. He'd say, Diana sees things the rest of us miss. I always thought he meant socially at those charity galas and dinner parties. Now I understand what he really meant. As William departed, Andrew approached, a satisfied smile on his face. Congratulations. The Diana Maxwell Women in Finance program is officially launched. Thanks to your support, I acknowledged. I couldn't have done this without your backing. A true partnership, Andrew said, offering his arm as we walked toward the elevator. Perhaps that's the real Maxwell legacy. Not just financial success, but the power of complementary minds working together. The observation struck me as profound, especially coming from the son who had once been so determined to claim exclusive control of the Maxwell fortune and legacy. Perhaps you're right, I agreed. Though I hope future partnerships will be more transparent than Robert's and mine were. Andrew nodded thoughtfully as we descended to the lobby. I've been meaning to ask you something. The Maxwell method is evolving. It has to, as markets change and new factors emerge. I'd like to formalize a collaborative approach to its continued development. You, me, and key members of the analysis team, working together openly, acknowledging all contributions. The Maxwell Method 2.0? I suggested with a smile. Exactly, Andrew confirmed, building on the foundation you and Dad created, but adapted for today's markets and today's corporate culture. No more shadows, no more hidden architects. The proposal represented everything I had hoped for, not just recognition of my past, contributions, but a pathway to continued relevance and impact, a chance to share my knowledge openly rather than through the filter of someone else's persona. I think that's an excellent idea, I said as we reached the building's entrance. When do we start? How about Monday? Andrew suggested. I'll arrange a conference room, invite the key team members. Monday it is, I agreed. As I walked to my car, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with Robert's death and Andrew's betrayal had led me through anger, determination, vindication, and finally to this moment of creation. I had reclaimed my past, secured my present, and now was actively shaping not just my future but the future of women in my field. That evening, I returned to the house that had nearly been taken from me, now unquestionably mine in both legal and emotional terms. I poured a glass of wine and sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone chimed with a text from Melissa. Just got the news about the Women in Finance program. Incredible. Lunch next week to celebrate? I have some design concepts for the logo I'd love to show you. I smiled, typing back a quick agreement. Another unexpected gift of this journey. A genuine relationship with my daughter-in-law, based on mutual respect rather than obligatory family ties. As darkness fell, I thought about the young women who would benefit from the program that now bore my name. Women who would never have to hide their financial acumen or sublimate their talents to succeed. Women who might look at my story not as a cautionary tale, but as evidence that it's never too late to step into the light, to claim one's rightful place. The invisible woman had not only become visible, she had become a beacon for others. And in that transformation lay the truest victory of all. 1 year to the day after Robert's funeral, I stood at the podium in Maxwell Tower's grand conference room, addressing the first cohort of Diana Maxwell Women in Finance scholars. 20. Brilliant young women with sharp minds and ambitious dreams, selected from hundreds of applicants across the country. Your path will not be easy, I told them, looking into their eager faces. The financial world remains challenging for women, but unlike my generation, you won't have to hide your light. You won't have to operate from the shadows. From the back of the room, Andrew watched with quiet pride. Our relationship had gradually transformed over the months, not back to what it had been, but into something new, a partnership of equals based on mutual respect rather than prescribed family roles. The Maxwell Method 2.0 initiative had proven remarkably successful, combining my analytical framework with Andrew's leadership vision and the fresh perspectives of younger team members. The company's performance had not merely stabilized but strengthened, silencing any remaining critics who had doubted my contributions. After the ceremony, Andrew approached with Melissa, who had designed the foundation's striking new logo, her first major professional project since restarting her design career. You've created something extraordinary here, Andrew said, gesturing to the scholars now mingling with mentors and board members. This is a legacy that will outlast all of us. Our legacy, I corrected gently. This wouldn't exist without your support. Melissa squeezed my hand. Those young women look at you like you're a legend, and you are, just not for the reasons anyone would have imagined a year ago. Later that evening, Catherine hosted a small dinner at her home to mark the anniversary, not of Robert's death, but of my rebirth. Thomas Jenkins was there, along with Margaret and a few others who had supported me during those turbulent early months. A toast, Catherine said, raising her glass. To my sister, who spent decades hiding her brilliance only to emerge more powerful than anyone could have imagined. To Diana, the others echoed, their faces warm with genuine affection. As conversation flowed around me, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the widow facing eviction to the acknowledged financial strategist directing a major corporation. From the mother betrayed by her son to the mentor helping shape his evolution into a more enlightened leader than his father had been. The victory hadn't been without costs. Some relationships had been irreparably altered. The comfortable illusions of my old life had been shattered. The simple maternal bond I'd once shared with Andrew had been replaced by something more complex, more nuanced. Yet what I'd gained far outweighed what I'd lost. Not just professional recognition or financial security, but the profound freedom that comes from living authentically. No more hiding my intelligence behind a pleasant smile. No more translating my insights into language Robert could present as his own. No more pretending to be less than I was to make others comfortable. After dinner, Andrew walked me to my car, the night air cool around us. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said quietly, wondering what he would make of all this. "What conclusion have you reached?" I asked. Andrew considered this carefully. "I think he'd be proud, not just of the company's success, but of how we've transformed his legacy into something better than what he left behind." "I'd like to think so too," I agreed. "Mom," Andrew said, using the familiar address that had once been automatic, but now felt like a deliberate choice. "I need to say something I should have said months ago. I'm sorry for how I treated you after Dad died, for trying to push you aside, for dismissing your contributions, for treating you as dispensable." The apology touched me deeply. "Thank you, Andrew. That means more than you know." "I was wrong," he continued, "and I'm grateful every day that you fought back, not just for yourself, but for what Maxwell Investments could become, for what I could become." We embraced then, the first genuine embrace we had shared since before Robert's death. Not everything was healed between us, not every wound fully closed, but we had found our way to a new understanding, a relationship built on truth rather than comfortable illusions. The following morning, I took a rare day off and drove to the cemetery where Robert was buried. I hadn't visited since the funeral, too caught up in the battle for recognition and the subsequent rebuilding of my life. I placed flowers on his grave and stood in the quiet morning light, feeling oddly peaceful. "You should have told him," I said softly to the marble headstone. "It would have been easier coming from you. But perhaps this was the journey I needed to take on my own." A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, nature's only answer. "We built something remarkable together, Robert," I continued. "Not perfect, not always fair, but remarkable nonetheless. And now it's evolving into something even better, something neither of us could have created alone." As I turned to leave, I noticed a young woman watching me from a respectful distance. I recognized her immediately as Jennifer Chen, one of the Diana Maxwell scholars, brilliant and determined. "Mrs. Maxwell," she said hesitantly, approaching. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was visiting my grandmother's grave and saw you here." "Not an intrusion at all," I assured her. Jennifer glanced at Robert's headstone. "I've read everything I could find about your story, how you were the true financial mind behind Maxwell Investments all those years. It changed how I think about my own career." "In what way?" I asked. "It made me realize I don't have to choose between being underestimated or being feared," she said thoughtfully. "There's another path, being so exceptional at what you do that eventually the truth can't help but emerge." I smiled, recognizing in her words the lesson of my own journey. "That's exactly right, Jennifer. The truth finds its way to the light eventually. Our job is simply to be ready when it does." As we walked together through the sunlit cemetery, I felt a profound sense of completion. The invisible woman had not only stepped into the light, she was now helping guide others along their own paths, to visibility, to recognition, to the full expression of their brilliance. This, I realized, was the truest fortune I had reclaimed. Not the millions in assets or the corporate title, but the freedom to finally be, unapologetically, myself.